I appreciate that. All right, well, let's go ahead and do this then.
Yeah,
All right, I'm recording on my end too, so we're ready to go.
great.
All right, everyone. All right, this is Derrick Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network and 90.1 KPFT Houston. And today we are talking with a friend of mine, somebody who I've been looking forward to introducing you guys to, Miss Sarah Wu, a woman of several titles. I'll allow her to introduce a little further and talk about some of the labels that she wears and the titles. But first, how are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. It's actually afternoon. I'm on the
Yeah.
East upstate.
Well, happy afternoon to you. Yeah, go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself. I mean, I have a list here of different titles I could put with you, but I think it'd be better for you to just share a little bit about what you care about and what you're involved with.
Perfect. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the invite too. So nice. You know, you and I have been working together the past few years at the Envision Festival. So how we were connected that way. And I guess one of my titles there is that I'm a co-founder and co-producer of that festival. And we're coming into our 10-year anniversary. And so it's a music, arts, movement, and educational global festival held in Costa Rica annually. And so I curate all of our education. That's how you and I were connected, because in my essence is I'm a facilitator of educational experiences. And that's what I feel the most passionate about. That's what I feel is one of the most important things that we can offer to people, especially, you know, with you and you know, work with anarchism and decentralization and sociocracy and all these kinds of things. Permaculture, it's like our education system has failed. The youth has failed us in so many ways. You know, it's this preconditioned, systematized process of trying to teach people something, you know. And so what I'm most passionate about is, you know, alternative adult education. You know, I don't teach children really, mostly like late teenagers into adults. And so I am definitely like a facilitator and a teacher and a channel for that. Along with that, like what I teach is what I call now therapeutic deep ecology. And so it started with herbalism. I've been an herbalist for 20 years, almost 20 years, 19-ish. And, you know, that's been a long journey unto itself. And then I started studying and working with permaculture about a decade ago. And so permaculture is an ecological design philosophy that was originally rooted in the development of human settlement in response to globalization, like destroying ecosystems in response to globalization, destroying social structures. And then it's evolved throughout the years into a deeper philosophy, into wellness, into uh, social systems, power structures, educational systems, into finance, and, you know, in a response to capitalism, and really taking people back into their bioregions and thinking about bioregional prosperity. And so, you know, I have like a pretty broad perspective, you know, on ecological awareness from the social standpoint, especially through like the wellness lens. And so, you know, I touch on many different things, and then also through, you know, the festival, which, you know, it's kind of a funny thing because I never really went to festivals. I was always like a concert goer and everything. And so, you know, to be producing a festival, it's just ended up for me being this amazing platform to reach a lot of people, you know. And like you and I were just talking about before we went live, it's like we need to reach as many people as possible. The festival, it's a little bit of the choir, but at the same time, it's like we're reaching people who may not have even thought to come to a workshop by you or I, you know, getting.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the kind of multi-angled approach that you take. You know, I've seen just over the, like you mentioned, the last couple of years that we've been working together, I've seen you involved in permaculture, obviously permaculture design courses, and herbalism. And I want to talk about the village witches in a few moments, and just a number of different things. And I appreciate the approach. What do you think, like for you, why do you think it's important to have that, what I would consider to be a holistic approach, you know, as opposed to say just being a permaculture teacher or just doing the festival? Like, why is that important to you to have that, you know, that rounded approach?
Yeah, I mean, the difference between holistic, like the opposite of holistic, is what we call reductionist, you know. And that goes back into like scientific revolution, Descartes, who said that the earth is machine, man is machine. And that's how we started treating ourselves, you know, as like these reduced little parts of something that could just be like replaced and thrown away. And that eventually led into what we know now is like planned obsolescence, right? And so it's like that throwaway culture. And we have a throwaway culture, not of just like material stuff, but also of the human being, you know, the human psyche, the human soul, of like the human mind. It's like just use it, mine it for resources, and toss it away, you know. And so the holistic approach is like trying to I mean, because the reductionist perspective in some ways is really important. Like that's also scientific advance, you know, and that's helped us to understand like how the human body works, like getting down to like the minutia of like cells and atoms and all these kinds of things, the chemistry of it, you know, but that's only just like one layer of it. And it's like human beings in this world, it's multitudes. There's so many layers of life and evolution, adaptation all happening at the same time that's happening within us right now within this conversation. It's like just to look at you as like, okay, he's a man and this is his anatomy and this is like how we're going to treat his individual anatomy, but not even looking at like the multitudes of who you are, you know, as a human being, interrelated with everything else around you, you know. And so that holistic perspective is the response to reductionism, you know, again, of human and earth as machine.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it's really putting on display and helping people understand the interconnectivity, the interconnectedness of all life. And we were kind of touching on this before we started here. You were talking about the importance of our health as individuals and as a species, and how that relates to the health of the planet. You want to talk about that for a moment? Just why, how those things are connected?
Absolutely. So, you know, like what I've been seeing through my own personal, you know, journey of the wounded healer, because we all have wounds, and all those wounds and those scars like are just roadmaps for us to try to navigate life and to ideally help other people, right? And what I found is like, and what I see is that people, it's like we'll be on this healing path and we're constantly looking for the panacea or the heal all. It's like the one thing, you know, like whether it's like you know, the superfood fad, or it's like the other yoga guru, or it's like another influencer. It's like, which we both are, you know, but again, there's multitudes of that. It's like, there isn't just one, and human beings really love that. And I think that that's the reductionist philosophy still so ingrained in us that we don't see sometimes that like if there are other beings around us suffering, and this goes into like the Buddhist concept of right livelihood, which we talk a lot about in permaculture. It's like if other things are suffering, like how does that affect us? And essentially like we are earthlings, you know, we are from this earth, like we are molded from the clay of the earth. That is what our bones are made of, or the minerals of this planet, you know. It's like if our planet is suffering, there is absolutely no way that the human being will ever achieve, you know, like a state of optimum wellness. It's like, and we talk about it as achievements, and I think that it's all just like a process and a journey, you know. And so through permaculture and through herbalism, what I've really been trying to get people to understand, and what the thesis is behind like the class that I've developed that I teach called Permaculture for the Herbalist Path, is like we are of the earth and the earth is of us. And so it's looking at like how are we just a mirror image of the planet around us, you know. And so it really for me goes into like, it doesn't matter how much superfood you eat, it doesn't matter how much yoga you do, it doesn't, organic farming matters, but it's like that's not the only thing, you know. It's like there's so many layers there. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know if it will be achieved in our lifetimes or the next few lifetimes, you know, but I think that, you know, we're we're starting to blaze the path, and we're continuing some of the path that's been starting to be chopped, you know, and trying to find a new way. And you know, and it's also one of those things because people are constantly looking for answers, you know. And I think for those of us who really enjoy philosophizing, we know that there are no answers, and that like I'm not the end all to anything, and I should never be the person's only teacher, you know, or their only wellness practitioner. It's like, and that goes into the multitudes again of like how many different resources we have to pull from to create like to try to find a wellness balance within the human body at least. And it's the same thing in externally reflected in the planet. It's like there is no one solution to the problems that we have. I think the only one solution, possibly the panacea, would be deep empathy, you know, for what's going on. And not just empathy between human beings, because I believe that like our greatest disease is actually apathy. It's not cancer, it's not diabetes, it's whatever, you know, autoimmune conditions. It's all the things that are plaguing people's physical bodies, but it's like apathy is what's destroying us. Is like we don't give a shit enough, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a couple of important things I want to touch on there. For one, I absolutely agree with you that, the changes, the bigger changes that many of us, and I imagine those who are tuned into this conversation, care about. they might not necessarily be things that we are even going to see in our lifetime. And that's something that I've long ago accepted. And I think that can be difficult for some people to accept, to feel like, well, why should I, again, the apathy, why should I make an effort if I won't even see the end results, right? Or it can become overwhelming. And again, maybe they just, well, I'd rather just be apathetic or not care. For me, I sort of see it as empowering, and I relate it back to our indigenous principles of seventh generation, and thinking not only of the current generation, but the seven coming generations, and getting people to realize that I feel like it's such an important task for us to say, I can take action towards something that I might not see the results of. Like, how humbling and powerful is that if you realize that we can be the proactive ones and start to lay the groundwork, or at least maybe hopefully make the coming future a little bit easier for the generations that are coming after us, so they can continue the work, and it keeps going and it keeps going. I think that's really important to notice, because sometimes the problems, and especially when it comes to ecological crises and the different news that we get about the world, people are often overwhelmed and can feel like either hopeless or there's no reason to even bother. I'm being told that the world's going to end at this point, or there is, I think, mixed in with some important awareness about what's going on the planet. I think we also get sometimes lumped in with what I would consider be doom porn and fear porn. This sort of idea that obviously humanity is affecting the planet without a doubt, but this idea that we are the problem and that we can't be the solution, in fact. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, for folks who get into permaculture and get into environmentalism and herbalism and start looking at these issues and realizing, like, whoa, there are some really big things that are, coming on our horizon, and the planet's facing all these different crises, and might feel overwhelmed about it. I think it's also important to note that we as a species can and do have a powerful positive effect as well whenever we put our minds to it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, just the sort of overall situation we're facing ecologically, and how you personally take on what sometimes is really heavy news.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just saw an article the other day in my social feed about the human species coming to an end by 2050, like those kinds of uh, doom and gloom, um, media terrorism in some ways, even though it's in my echo chamber, like I'm subscribing to see that stuff. But, it's like, that just feeds fatalism, and it feeds fear, and it feeds apathy, and it disempowers people to think that, like, and I was just talking about this the other day too, about individual action, and how, like, individuals might feel powerless as one, but it's like, but the individual actions, they're exponentially important, and so it's like every little thing that someone can do, it's like, take that for what it is. And I put something else in my social feed the other day, like a story about, like, it was like, thank you to the person who, is knitting sweaters for homeless people, but then not aware of fast fashion. Like, thank you to the people who are sitting here talking about decentralization and not aware of, what's happening in Sudan. Like, those kinds of things. It's like, and also Bill Mollison said the same thing. He's like, as the collective, we are advancing forward. And that's like and Bill Mollison, for people who don't know, is the founder of permaculture. And so I think that's like one of the key to cultivating, empathy and compassion again, and empowerment, is that, like, you really are, like, so powerful. And as the collective, the human species, like Homo sapiens, we are a keystone species on this planet. Like, our planet has gone through many now mass extinctions. That's real. Like, we know that, like many, many mass extinctions, like 5 or 6 or something. And whether it's asteroids hitting, it was volcanoes going off, and we are in mass extinction again. And right now we have this consciousness. It's like, right here, this being that we are on this planet, we've, like, evolved into the most miraculous, most beautiful thing, and that's why I love so much, like, one of your taglines of, like, we were beautiful, we were powerful, we were free. And it's just like, keep remembering that. It's like, as the keystone species, if we disappeared, yeah, like, the planet would fix itself. But the real thing is that we're here, and that we've been here for a long time, and that we've created this world in the way that, like, we have tried to do our best through many, many years, and it's like, I don't like blame, because it's like, we look at industrial revolution, we look at the green revolution, all these things that actually made life easier for us in many ways. You know, it's like it extended our livelihoods. It's like vaccines are preventing, you know, or prevented originally, you know, like a lot of illness, and it's real. You know, like chlorinating water is cleaned up. Like now people aren't dying of parasitism, where you look at certain countries where there isn't municipal water treatment, you know, like Guatemala, and people are suffering from parasites constantly because 90% of the water is contaminated. So it's like we have the brilliance, infinite brilliance and infinite potential to figure this out. And, you know, somehow because of current power structures that we've allowed to come into place for various reasons, like have kind of suppressed the idea that we are anything more than that, we aren't powerful, you know, and like we really are. And I think that's like the shift that's happening right now with like people waking up or like whatever and coming into states of awareness and like on what is happening in the world, because we are a global community now. And I don't know, for me it's like I definitely go into moments of despair, you know, and but when those moments of despair come in, I think about you, you know, and I think about like all you guys, and I think about every single person out there who is making someone else feel loved and making someone else feel empowered, and making, or not making someone feel, because we can't make people feel, but you know, supporting people in their positive process. And so, you know, it's like when you talk about the seventh generation, like where I am right now, this is actually Iroquois territory, and that's where that comes from, you know, the Iroquois uh, declaration, and which we based our constitution off of, ironically, in the United States. But you know, when I think about that in permaculture, we always say we design beyond our borders, and how I've personally extended that in my teaching is we design beyond our future. And it's like everything we do right now isn't just for us, because everything that's affecting right now isn't because of us. And so we have to know that. And that's like, for me, quite reassuring. And it gives me this sense of being eternal, you know, and like how we're able to affect generations ahead. And so it's like the littlest things that we do are going to ripple, you know, really, really far into the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lots of good stuff there. And yeah, I think it's just important to take that note because as you said, sometimes these things come across our feeds. And, you know, I wrote this article a couple of years ago when there was the first announcement, I think, that we had moved into the sixth extinction era. And there was a number of different scientists and researchers that were out there with their, you know, being quoted as saying like, this is it. We're, you know, the planet, everything's dead. We're killing everything. And it was, the response that I was seeing from people was, again, like you said, it was one of blame. It wasn't really like, well, what's the solution? It was more like, oh, well, I guess humanity's so horrible. And you see the social media responses, some people kind of, it's like a celebration of how bad we are as a species. Like, oh yes, let's just kind of like stay in that position of, well, yeah, humans are so this, I wish I wasn't, you know, I wish we never came onto this planet. It's really this negative. I think it goes into a deeper kind of maybe personal issues that people might have to work on their own trauma, because everything, as you said, that we're dealing with in the physical environment, it really is a reflection of our internal world. You know, it's of our internal struggles and our own trauma. So it has to, in my view, and I think yours as well, we have to have that ability to work on our own traumas and our own healing, as well as to coming together collectively to take on the traumas that we have either directly or indirectly created in on the planet, in the ecosystem. So absolutely important. I want to talk with you a little bit about herbalism now, if you don't mind, and just share a little bit about, I guess, let's define that first. What is herbalism for those who maybe don't have a clear definition of that, and how you relate that to your life and to the work that you do?
Absolutely. So interesting, because herbalist refers to many different things. So again, the multitudes. Like if this was 1,000 years ago, the herbalist was the doctor. You know, they were the people who knew medicine. They were the people who, depending on the bioregion that people were coming from, they had different roles, you know. And so like if you were uh, you know, and sometimes the gender role also did play or had an effect on the herbalists. And so like women, because it's believed through our human evolution that we were the gatherers and men were the hunters, right? That's how we think that we evolved. And so we had a closer relationship with plants initially, not to say that men don't, men actually absolutely do. Um, and so it's kind of been treated as like a feminine craft, although in many different cultures, like the men are strong herbalists as well and are very connected to plant realm. And so, like when we go into like our main influence on medicine right now goes back to like Greek philosophy, and using plants. The psychospiritual realm through Greek philosophy was there, but they, through like what we call vitalism, is the philosophy behind that, which is the vital force that's permeating throughout all living things. And so it's just like when we're consuming a plant or consuming an animal, it's just a transference of the vital energy of one into another. And so that's how many herbalists practice, though some herbalists do practice from the reductionist perspective of like treating a disease with a plant. As an herbalist, we're holistic practitioners, and so we treat people, not diseases, typically. And so an herbalist does mean many things. Like, so if you asked a chef what an herb is, they would say, an aromatic plant that I use to spice and flavor my food, right, to enhance flavor. If you asked a botanist what an herb is, they would say, well, an herb is a plant with a non-woody stem. If you said I'm an herbalist, what I'm saying and what I refer to is that I work with plants, which can be trees, it could be all parts of plants, it could be non-woody stems, it could be lichens, which are emerging with plant to fungi, it could be very primal plants like horsetails, it could be ferns, like all different kinds of plants and all the different parts of plants, as well as fungi, as well as, or many herbalists are integrated practitioners. And so we're also, considering like modern medicine and things called phytopharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. And so phytopharmaceutical would be something that's extracted from a plant, so an isolated constituent, and then a nutraceutical will be something like a vitamin. Right. But we're also thinking about like when pharmaceuticals come into play, food therapy, lifestyle, because herbalism in essence is holistic. And so we're thinking about mind, body, spirit, and interrelationships between ecology, like the outward environment, internal ecology, and social ecology. So relationships between people too. And so, like as an herbalist, that's a kind of a big description. But we're definitely a very diverse group of people, and some herbalists will practice traditional systems, like the ones that when we say a system, we're talking about like layers of belief systems and cultural paradigm. And so like some of the most well-known ones would be like traditional Chinese medicine, or something like Ayurveda, which is the medicine from continental India, Unani Tib, which is like the Greco-Arabic medicine. There's a revival right now in what we call the wise woman tradition, which is looking at the traditions of the native peoples of Europe before we were monocultured, and like where does that come from, and looking through the deeper mysteries of like who women were. Then there's like all the different, like tribal bioregional medicine practices, which also have their own paradigm, their own belief system, cosmovision, worldview, and how they see the human body working. And so like as myself as an herbalist, especially coming from the US, like not having much of a cultural identity, being of like mixed racial background, being, growing up in the suburbs, it's like things get kind of diluted, and like identity is like a weird thing on who you are. And so I consider myself a planetary eclectic herbalist. And that's pulling from a few different traditions as well, because the eclectics were actually predominantly men in the United States in the 1800s who were trained in the most like up-to-date modern scientific medical, training of the times, but then they didn't believe in poisoning people, and they didn't believe in bleeding people, and they didn't believe, in the reductionist perspective. And they were actually the ones who started to integrate the medicines from North America into practice. And so really, really interesting, because that was where they started to bridge modern of the times with the traditions of, the people from Turtle Island. And so it was, and then they also pulled from, again, like, okay, so what is bioregionally appropriate here? And like what is needed and what's available here? And so for me, like being planetary means that like I love pulling from many different traditions, and I don't see it as cultural appropriation. Like there's a lot of that happening in herbalism right now, where it's talking about like decolonizing medicine. And I think a lot of it is coming from this like new, but not new, but new awareness of things like ayahuasca and iboga and peyote, and people really needing like the entheogenic wake up. entheogenic, another nice word for psychedelic, both of them meaning pretty much like the psychedelic meaning the oracle of the soul, and entheogenic meaning awakening God from within. And so people going into those and then all of a sudden tagging, like slapping like shaman onto their business card. And so there's that. And then there's also, you know, a really big issue with taking medicinal plants from the wild. And so that's also where like the colonization of medicine is kind of an issue, because people taking from native lands. And so some herbalists believe that we shouldn't be collecting from the wild. Some still will wildcraft. Like I still wildcraft in very moderate amounts, depending on the bioregion, but I really try to focus on purchasing and cultivating organic, you know, fair trade herbs. And so, because we want to support herb growers as well. And so there's a lot of different things going on with what it means to be an herbalist today. And beautifully, it's like now it's this accepted profession, where 20 years ago when I got started, it was like so hard to get people to trust you. You know, it just wasn't.
Yeah. I had lots of beautiful topics there. I want to just, well, for one, I appreciate the kind of background on the phrase, you know, how it can be applied from different ways, and also how you apply it to yourself. And also, I really appreciate the mention of decolonization of medicine, because I do think that, as you said, more people, as the Western world is discovering, you know, for themselves, rediscovering on a larger level, plant medicines from ayahuasca to iboga and everything else. There is an important conversation taking place about you know, ayahuasca tourism, and you know, the impacts of so many people coming and getting connected to the plant medicine, which I think is a vital thing, and it does help some people have transformational experiences that can be long lasting. And then, as you said, there is also maybe sort of the darker side of that, where there, you know, is maybe not so much of a regard to the different ecosystems in the bioregions, as well as just the culture and the customs of the people who have been, you know, keeping these medicines for generations. And you know, I can say that, you know, as far as the cultural appropriation, I think that's a really interesting topic that we won't get into too much today. But I want to say on that it's been interesting for me, as somebody who is native but didn't grow up on a reservation and wasn't taught any, you know, native traditions. My family has a lot of drug addiction and alcoholism in prison, so there's a lot of not looking back to the past, and you know, not talking about those things. So I've had to come to the traditions of my family and find them on my own, learn from the Choctaw and learn from the Lakota and others. And so it's been really interesting to see that as I pursue that, and again, kind of from somebody who didn't grow up on the reservation, but getting to meet those who have grown up, you know, within that experience, and learn their perspectives of what maybe they see as cultural appropriation, and where I feel, you know, I think it's important, and I think the creator wants all of us to learn from each other. And there's a way to do that in a respectful manner that does show an appreciation for a culture, not just take what you want and ignore the source of it, and you know, the where it comes from, and those sort of things. So I think that there's a balance to be struck, just like with everything, right? To learn from everybody, to learn from the different cultures. And I also think that something else you said that I really appreciate, which actually leads to the next topic. You were talking about the wise woman tradition, and you know, witches, and how it really is true. I've tried to get more and more people to see that we're all indigenous. You know, whether you are of, you know, European descent, or you know, whatever the color of your skin is, we're all indigenous. Prior to colonization, mentally and physically, of Europe, there were what we would consider shamans or witches or teachers, you know, and healers. And now it's, you know, that's so far gone for a lot of people. And we're here now in America, where the natives in America, our traditions have been under attack for 500, 600 years. And so you have a mix of different tribes who, some, like, for example, I'm going to Sundance next week at Choctaw, in Choctaw land. The Choctaw never had a Sundance originally, but it's something that has come along as those who have survived have tried to keep the language alive, to keep the traditions alive. And some of them are pulled from other tribes, or, you know, they kind of make them their own. But it's because of the colonization, the effects of colonization, that so much has been lost. And even more has been lost, I would say, for those who are of European descent, because it's been buried under this, what you know, we refer to as a monoculture. So I do think that's important for people to understand, that no matter what background you have, whether you're Irish descent, you know, German, Italian, what have you, there are traditions that, you know, existed on that land, you know, however far back you want to go, wherever you feel connected to. There are traditions that are, you know, that predate our modern era. And I think it's important for each of us, or at least I find it important for each of us, to pursue as much of that as we can, and to try to understand those deeper traditions, because I do think that they're more connected to the earth than what we're offered today and what we're shown. Like you said, the kind of United States is more of like a blend of cultures that almost ends up becoming no culture, where people are sort of like, well, what's my identity? Where do I fit in? And whenever they maybe are attracted or drawn to something, they might not have a real blood relation to it, but it might be calling to their spirit, and so it's important for us to, I think, to be able to pursue these different traditions with respect, with that balance, with that reverence for where they came from, and to understand that we all do have indigenous roots. And so I appreciate that. And I wanted you to elaborate now on so at Envision, I know that you're involved with the Village Witches area, right? And you mentioned the Wise Woman tradition. Talk a little bit about that. So for some of the people who might be hearing witches and who knows what kind of things are popping up in their minds, right? But I know that that's an important thing that you've been involved in, and I'd like to know more about that, like how that connects to you and your path, and what's the truth about witches?
So juicy. All of that. Okay, well, let's go back. What you were saying about, that we're all indigenous to somewhere at one point. And this lack of identity that we have right now with globalization and monoculturing in particular, is, it's killed the indigenous soul. And so what we look to right now is like we romanticize the cultures that are left. And we're like, okay, what do they have that we don't have? What can we learn from? But at the same time, there's still like that heathen, right, perspective of like, this isn't like modern, this is whatever. And, but it's still so romanticized. And my messaging and my identity as witch, and really coming out of the broom closet that way strongly, like that's something that I'm really passionate about and like really love talking about and feel safe talking about, wasn't always the case, and so for me, what witch means, because it has different connotations for other people because of cultural conditioning, because of storytelling, right? Because there's like the multitudes of woman as well. And so for people who identify as witch, there is oneness and there's duality and there's multitudes. And so some people will be polytheistic in like their, the energies that they're kind of praying to or worshiping or whatever you want to call it. But there is the knowledge of the oneness and the belief in the oneness, and that we're all back to one source. A lot of witches do identify with goddess and like the religions, some of the ancient religions of goddess and the resurgence of goddess, but it's not just a feminist, again, religion. For some it is, and for many it is not as well. For me, it is not. But I do bring it into the forefront because I do believe in like the gender balancing that needs to happen. And not to say that I want matriarchy versus patriarchy, because both are power over systems, and so there needs to be like a balancing. And so witchcraft in its essence is a political movement because it's contradictory to the power structure, because it believes in immanence, in that like we are our own divine, powerful, connected person, and that we have a direct channel to whatever your source is, whatever you want to name it. Like we are directly to that. We don't need intercessors, and because those intercessors, like we see in the Judaic, Christian, Islamic religions, is they have become power over structures, of like one that you have to get through the gate to like get to whatever else there is bigger than us. And so, like that identity of witch is there that way. And so I also believe that witches are translators for the land, and that like we are able, because of that like deep, deep, deep belief and knowledge of our immanence, we can connect in a way and serve as a channel for other people. And so when I say that, like, I'm meaning like, I'm not looking to be someone's guru. I'm not looking to be someone's like one source, for knowledge. Like I'm just wanting to be there to share what I've experienced, to share what I've learned, to share what I've seen and studied and learned from other people. And that's like, when we talk about the cultural appropriation, it's like, we have to always acknowledge, reference the sources from where we're getting things, so it's like if I'm quoting a teacher, I've learned this from so and so, I've seen this with my own eyes. Like we have to make sure to always reference the sources. We are a global community right now, and I think with referencing we're honoring. And so like with women coming into their power in different ways, whether it's seen like from the current capitalist perspective of like women as CEOs, women empowered that way, or just the empowered, the embodied empowerment of the woman who's like confident, who has leadership, who's able to be humble, who's, you know, who inspires, those kinds of things. I think that's also a part of sometimes who witches are, not always, you know, because for some it's a spiritual path, for some it's a political path, for some it's the healing path. And so it's many, many different things to many, many different people. And there isn't one definition, you know, of what it means to identify as witch. And so for me, you know, I'm an earth translator, you know, and that's really what I believe in, is like, and believe who I am, you know, as I want to share the messages that I'm receiving from the planet. And like, again, like through the teachings of my belief system about the human ecology just mirroring, you know, the ecology of the world around us and that interconnection. That's a really big part of it for me too. And so identifying as witch is squirmy to people because it's contradictory again to the current power paradigm that we have, and also the stories that we've been told. You know, like we only see, like if you watch Disney movies as a child, what you see are like, you know, the evil stepmother, you see the ugly witch, you see, you know, the witch taking the beautiful princess's voice and all these kinds of things. And it's like that is actually like an aspect of it. We see it in Kali, we see it in Medusa, you know, we see it in like the destroyer goddess. And so that is a face of the mother, because, you know, if that's just, you know, mimicking of the earth, like the earth is a destroyer as well. You know, we see it in hurricanes, we see it in volcanoes, we see it in earthquakes, we see it in floods, you know, like that's the destroyer aspect of the goddess. And what happens when we bring in the aspect of the, or when we destroy something, we're just really deconstructing it down to the essential parts, the essential nutrients, so then it can be reformed into something else again, you know. And so it's really important, but that deconstruction or the destruction is really scary to people, you know, because to break yourself down to your essential parts, it's like then you're just questioning like, who are you again? And it can go even deeper and really, really scary. And so, you know, like women have been disempowered and demonized, and you know, we've been a threat, and we're still a threat, you know, like even as now like a single empowered woman, it's threatening to guys who are like woke, you know, like these like powerful amazing men still are like threatened by empowered women and have a really hard time like connecting with empowered women. And so it's a struggle, you know. And so like the identity of witch and like what I bring to Envision, because that was kind of where you started with the whole question, is, you know, I want that word to be popular, actually. You know, I don't want it to be like taboo, just like I don't want herbal medicine to be alternative. Herbal medicine is medicine, which is an identity, you know, it's who someone is. And just like, you know, you can say like you have Native, you know, American roots. Like I can't say that. I have many different roots, but like my identity is witch. I'm a translator for the land. And so I wanted that to become like something that people think of and feel safe in, because for a long time we weren't safe. Like there was a mass persecution of women in particular, also men, but predominantly women for almost 500 years. It was right around the indigenous Holocaust of North America and into South America was when women were being eliminated in Europe, you know. And so, and that was the power over structure trying to eliminate, you know, the connection to the solar world and immanence, really. So, you know, I want people to remember that, because it was just a few generations ago that like our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunts and our best friends and our brothers, you know, were being horrifically like tortured, tried, ostracized, and murdered, you know, just for following their indigenous wisdom and their connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's such an important point to make. And like you said, it's just a few generations past. It's you know, everything in our world today goes so fast that, you know, 500 years seems, you know, like forever ago. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it was just, you know, yesterday. It was just there. And so we're not so far away from that. And I think it is important for each of us to, you know, to stand up and to speak proudly for what we identify as, or who, you know, who we connect with and the roots that we connect with, so that just saying to the world, like, hey, I'm here. I'm a, you know, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a witch, I'm an indigenous person, what have you. and we're here and we're represented and we're alive and still living today.
Mhm.
So I want to go ahead and start to wrap things up, but I want to give you a chance to let everybody know what other projects you have going or anything you have on the horizon that you might want to plug and share with us.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Let's see. Well, I teach. That's my pretty much my gig right now. Is I really come into a place of wanting to share everything I've experienced and learned through the years. And so I've developed a unique curriculum called Permaculture for the Herbalist's Path. And so it's became a 28-day course. It originally was 24, but there's so much content. And so it's looking at the permaculture design course, which is a formalized um, globally recognized course curriculum that I've expanded upon to look at the human dynamic through that, and like wellness and herbalism in particular, because I want herbalists practicing. You know, it's like we in decentralizing medicine means that we need herbalists in our bioregions practicing and being there in service to people, you know, and also with response with specifically, you know, natural disasters and political and economic disasters. Like herbalists are extremely resilient and we know the landscape, and we're the ones who, like, our medicines are in our backyards, and that we can't rely on municipal systems and we can't rely on pharmaceutical production to save us in case something goes down, you know. And so that's one of my biggest goals, is so to teach people, one, like the interconnection and interrelationship between the human body and the natural world, as well as, you know, I do an herbal clinic with Envision. And so we're coming to our 5th year with it. So far, we've trained about 100 students in herbal first aid and relief and acute care. And so it's like, this is our role. Integrated medicine is key. And so we can't wait for natural disasters to happen for people to get trained. And things like festivals, mass gatherings, rallies, you know, those kinds of things are like the perfect place to train, to be able to be resilient to respond. And so I have a few different things going on, you know, with teaching. People can go if they're interested. It's villagewitch.org is my website. You can go to Envision Festival. You can find me that way. All the social platforms and stuff, you know, and find my courses. I'm also doing a short, like 12-hour webinar called Intro to Permaculture for the Herbalist Path. So it's a philosophical perspective and really giving people a taste of like what they would get in the longer course. We have an apprenticeship coming up in November, medicine making apprenticeship. That's going to be a month long, and that's going to be in the Caribbean. I'm hoping to go to Puerto Rico in 2020. Puerto Rico is just like ripe for permaculture right now. And so I want to do permaculture for the herbalist path there. And I'm actually going this year to scout in Portugal. So to see about like possibly doing a course there every other year. So
Awesome. Lots of good stuff. What's your Instagram?
it is, because I'm not the only village witch. It is a copylefted name. There are village witches all over the globe. So there's many of us. It's _village.witch_.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Find Sarah there. Find her at, it was villagewitch.org, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And of course, check out Envision Festival. You guys have heard me talk about Envision Festival before. And for those who know, I've spoken in the past and absolutely appreciate and support all the efforts that are going on there. Sarah, it's been, I don't know, it's been awesome to just catch up with you and to share a little bit about, this has been helping me, you know, get a little bit more insight into your work, because usually when we're talking, it's like, there's a million other things going on at Envision. You're busy. You know, I'm enjoying myself and staying busy. So it's good to just catch up and get to know each other a little bit better and to hear your insight.
I appreciate your work so much. I really admire you, and just like how strong you are in your voice and how true you are to your path. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, please check out her website and make sure to get plugged in with her and maybe take a permaculture design course. I highly recommend it. I know that I will be taking one throughout this year and the beginning of next year. And until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.
Yeah,
Peace.
peace.